Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming to today's environmental talk. My name is Ngobile Makaye. I work for the Environmental Department, SIHOA. As we continue to celebrate today's World Environmental Day, tonight we are excited to host Dr. Sofia Forss. Her talk tonight is going to be on understanding small minds, and she will offer fascinating insights for her work at the Kalahari Research Center. I'll read Sofia's bio. Sofia is an evolutionary biologist specialized on her comparative cognition and animal behavior. Her research focuses on what makes animals explorative and how those underlying traits influence cognitive abilities. She is especially interested in development and how social and ecological variation during ontogeny influence cognitive processes and skill learning. The colonization of urban habitats presents a biological adaptation found intriguing as it presents interesting avenues for the fields of animal cognition. And I will quote Sofia, opening quotes, given that vervet monkeys are one of a few primate species that have successfully nanced into anthropogenic landscapes, they will provide us the excellent opportunity to study the interplay between environmental changes, motivation, and cognitive abilities. Everyone join me to welcome Sofia Forss.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. First, want to apologize for me not showing up yesterday. It's a very bad reputation for the Swiss that are normally on time. So sorry about that. It was a flight delay and I could not have made it on time. And I'm really, this is again one of the really exciting things about working at Simbithi, because people are so friendly and flexible. So thank you for being once more. But today, on a request from Simbithi residents, I am going to focus most of my talk on my other species that I study, the Kalahari meerkat. And so the big overarching question that my research is focusing is to understand what shapes the minds of animals. And in order to do so, we need to sort of uncover what kind of cognitive abilities they have. And together with a lot of people and a huge team, we're looking at this in two different perspectives. We're taking a developmental perspective, which means like what happens during an individual's lifetime, and especially what happens in that individual's early life. But we also look at this in an evolutionary perspective, in a more comparative way. What is an influence between environments and what's the influence between species? And I studied this mainly through two different projects. So the Mongoose Cognition Project, that's the one taking place in Kalahari Research Center, which is a long research site that was funded in the 90s. It's also one of the biggest research sites in animal behavior globally. And it is funded by Cambridge University together with Zurich. And this is my team over there. And then, as you are all familiar with here, we're also studying the Urban Vervet project. And this is a slightly larger team. Over the years, we have grown. People have come and gone, and the current members are in bold. So that's the fantastic people that actually get to do what I call the fun part of this job. So I'm really lucky because both of these animals live in South Africa, because otherwise it would make life really hard to travel and to visit these places. So we all know where we are, and Kalahari Research Centre lies 13 kilometers below the Botswana border in the Northern Cape, in the region of the Kuruma River Reserve. So if you ever are traveling around there, I can give you a lot of tips on where to go to watch the best star skies in the world and the beautiful sunsets and amazing meerkats. And then we also locate ourselves over here when we are talking about the monkeys a bit later. So this is how a postcard would look like if I would send it from Kalahari. It's a bit of a sandy, duney, sometimes more desert-like, sometimes more grassy-like, depending on the season. And we have a big old farmhouse, or actually multiple farmhouses where students are housed, and we have a kitchen and research labs, and it's quite a big infrastructure, actually. And then we have these guys. So meerkats are really interesting because they are what we call cooperative breeders, which means that in each group, there's only one female and one male that reproduce the pups. And the rest of the group are helpers, and they help to raise these pups. So they are indirectly not getting any biological fitness themselves. They're just there to cooperate for the group's best. And this is a very interesting social system because we humans are sometimes classified as semi or cooperative breeders too, because we have the luck to have grandmothers to help our raise the pups too. So, and they can have everything from one to multiple pups, so it can be a hard job for these guys. But we also have a lot of other species in this study site as well. So there's other mongooses, like the yellow mongoose. We have ground squirrels, a lot of antelopes and banded foxes, and the most beautiful sunsets that both the students and the meerkats love to take part of. So yeah, what are we trying to understand? So I want to understand, like, what is actually, like, even a small brain like that, what is it thinking, and what can it do, and what can it not do, and what shapes the way it is thinking? And sometimes I feel that we are mutual in our understanding here, because I think they try to figure out the same thing about me when I'm there. So we meet in the middle. So when I talk about what do meerkat needs to know, we talk about cognitive abilities, and you need to know something about your social world. So who's your friend, who's your foe, and keep track of those relationships. But you also need to keep track of all kind of ecological things, like when is a predator coming, where do I go to hide, and you also need to keep track on weather conditions, where to find food when, so on. So it's not actually so little. On top of that, you have some kind of sensory information coming through your nose. So you need to also take in all of that to understand what to eat, because they dig for food underneath the ground. So that kind of information needs to be processed as well. So one would say that searching is hard, and cognition is a capacity that is there to make life easier. And so animal cognition, you can divide it into multiple different things. It is information processing, it is curiosity, it's memory, it's learning, it's inhibition, and many, many more things. And as I mentioned, what I'm interested in is that you're not really born with these capabilities. So how do you go from here to here? And what happens? So I'm interested in taking a longitudinal approach in order to understand how your early life shapes your later life outcome, what we call biological fitness in the field. And normally these things have been studied in species with large brains, because a lot of the history of animal cognition, or to explain animal intelligence, was focused so far on why bigger brains are better, because that's how we humans see ourselves and that's how we relate to ourselves. Like, so a lot of research has gone in to explain why we have bigger brains. And therefore there's been a huge study bias towards clever bird species like the passerine birds, or primates like chimpanzees and other large brain species. But right now there's a huge shift in the field, and people start to open up a little bit to understand many different types of intelligences out there to explain what kind of minds are actually needed in what type of environments. And we all can divide these kind of pressures that should select for intelligence or cognitive abilities in the first place into two major boxes. So, like, it's very well known within the animal kingdom that social complexity shapes cognition. This means that if you live in groups like the baboons, you need to keep track on who is your ally, who is the one that's going to fight you one day, who's the one that I should look for mating opportunities with, and all of these things take processing capacity, and therefore evolution should select for brains. But there's also another thing that shapes these things, and that's the ecological challenges that you meet. So how to find food. But there's a lot of controversy in the biological literature about this. because there's also studies that showed right up different patterns that actually living in stable social groups without a lot of complex, that are still large and may have complexity, can select for reduced brain size and therefore not so high cognitive capacities. So this really means that we need a much better understanding of what sociality means for an animal and what demands it puts on an individual's cognitive capacities. So in mammal society, social complexity is normally understood as individualized relationships. What do I mean by that? That's individuals who can recognize each other and know who they are when they meet. And that's called complexity. And in eusocial insects, on the other hand, very social animals, social complexity refers to something different. It refers to the labor distribution between helpers and breeders. And this is also a social complex system. And so the reason I'm interested in the meerkats is because they are this interesting species in between, showing some aspects of the mammals, but also some aspects of eusociality like the insects. And if we think about it and want to zoom in to understand what is complex in their life, we can look at it this way. You have some individuals, we call them dominants, and they might be dominants for multiple years. Then they are the breeding pair of the population, so they are the ones that get the pups. And then they are helped by half-siblings, sisters, and offsprings, and they all genetically quite closely related to each other. So we have data on all of this because of this research site existing for multiple decades already. We have the genetic data. We have data on who gave birth to who and who's sister and brother of who. So we can completely track their whole pedigrees to understand these processes. So what we're trying to do is to combine these two boxes that people normally have divided up into two different selective pressures. And we're doing so in my research team by looking at the development. Because in mammals, development is one of the most impactful life stages in compared to other later on stages. And by looking at that from a developmental perspective, from the moment they are born, we can actually integrate both the social and ecological components into one model. So what we do, I'm going to show you, this is a timeline for a meerkat pup. And what we collect is that these guys are at birth, they spend the first week below the ground. So we don't know much about that time, unfortunately. And then they emerge from the natal burrow around 4 weeks. They stick around. They have a babysitter that take care of them every day when the rest of the group go out and forage. And then they start to join the group for foraging. And around 13 weeks, they are already nutritional independent. So you can imagine that there's a lot of things that needs to happen in between this time point and that time point. And even after here, there's still a lot of things they are not competent enough of. So they need to do a lot of new learning until they reach sub-adulthood. And those orange things that I put out there is the time in a meerkat life when we are collecting data on them so that we can actually track the very same individual across its whole life and see how it changes. And the kind of data that we're taking is observational. So we collect data on social scans, so who they are close by with, so that we create social network analysis on who are their buddies and who they spend time with. And we collect data on foraging. That means we really walk after them and see what do they eat, how much do they eat, and how good are they at finding this. This takes a lot of eyes. You cannot do this quickly and easily. This is dedicated fieldwork by amazing PhD students. And we do experimental stuff. So we give them problems to solve and we test for their personality traits. So first, I'm going to show you a little bit about how a social life is in meerkats, because they are actually dominated by two different features. You can be dyadic in your relationship. This means that you have a tendency to spend some time with somebody more than somebody else, or you can be generally social. That means that you're in the group. These components differ in your early life environment. So we have developmental week. They are young. Here they get nutritional independent, and then they grow slowly up. And why am I showing this? Because we do find that throughout the developmental period, their one-on-one relationships are much more important than their general gregariousness. So this means that we do sort of think that they need those relationships, obviously, because they get fed by the adults. So they need to understand who is feeding me, and they target those adults that bring them the most food. But that's already quite clever for this teeny tiny brain. So they might have different social skills amongst each other, and some might be better at it than others. So we've looked at that a little bit. We haven't really analyzed this to an end yet, but this is our preliminary data where we show that the proportion of a meerkat pup to forage is highly variable throughout their early life. And then they all become a bit the same. So what is going on? They also differ in how much food they beg for the adults. So the thing that's going on is that we believe that they differ in the way they can actually decide about their social situation in a group, which takes some social cognitive skills. If we look at this together, we find that there are two different strategies going on here potentially. So there might be those young ones that have figured out it's a good strategy to figure out which guy is going to be the one that catches the prey and give me the food. And then you keep close to that guy as much as you can. So you have a good social strategy. You exploit your social relationships. But there are also those who can't do that, because if you have a sibling that does that, then you need to come up with something else. Like in human world, you don't want to be same as your brother, right? And therefore, those guys might have to invest in becoming independent foragers much earlier. So their ecological competence goes up. And then the big question is that we're going to look at in the future is one of these strategies better than the other? So I just don't want to bore you too much with graphs. I want to show you some videos. This is a snake test. So this is how we look at how small pups react to a snake. Because in snake is also an interesting thing for meerkats. It can be both a prey and a predator, depending on which snake and depending on your own size. So that takes a lot of machinery again to distinguish which situation am I going to attack the snake and in which situation am I going to retreat away from the snake. And this is how we test it. It's like we have the snake model and there's a meerkat foraging underneath that bush. And at some point, he's going to see the snake. And he goes for it. This is one of the tough and bold little fellas.
Right shoulder.
And then we have what we call an extractive foraging test. So we're looking at how they learn, because we're measuring this over many, many time points. We give them little problems to solve. This is an obstacle removal task where you have one chamber for motivation. So we just have an open chamber where they can get a little bit of egg, and we see if they are even hungry enough to do the work for us to take part in this test. And they then have to poke the nose through a toilet paper, they have to open a cat flap, or they have to pull a pull door. It's relatively simple in the world of a human being, but not that simple, I think, for a small meerkat. And this is how I think his name is Tiramisu is doing. And they are very, very vocal. As you can hear, they like to talk all the time. They chit-chat, this species. And this is his sister. And now I want you to pay attention, because these two have grown up in the same social environment, and they have had also the same ecological conditions. They more or less also have the same genes, because this species, they all share a lot of within group relatedness. And look how she's doing at the same age as well. So she's clearly motivated. She went for her egg. It's just a little bit of a different meerkat, right? She doesn't really do what her brother did, not at least straight away. Like, doesn't come as, and then she gave up. So what is that due to, right? Here is a little bit of a pilot results on these tasks, that over the time we measure the curves of their learning trajectories through their ontogeny. And every row here is a litter. So these are siblings, and these are siblings in a group. And I put some black round rings around, because so that you can see that in every sibling group, there are some guys that are just not as good. And then we have the Smarties. So there is variation even within siblings that have grown up together and supposedly have as much as you can shared development. So what we want to know, of course, is why is this and what shapes this individual variation that we find out, and what is the evolutionary currency, like why does individual variation then evolve, like what's the benefit of it? And another thing that we look at is how they navigate in space. So we give them a maze task. I'm going to again show a video, but I want to explain it first. So this is the box with 3 arms, and we pick up the meerkat, we put it in the starting box, and it comes into a room that looks like this. This is a little bit egg, that's the reward, and it has to seek itself out. And then it will have to remember, we do this 4 times in a row, so we see how quickly they learn from their first experience, and then we repeated that again all over those developmental time points, so that we really get a good, robust measurement of how good this meerkat is to orient it in space. So this is how this looks like. And first she went to the one arm that was apparently wrong, and then she did that. And one thing that's interesting that we do is we do this when they are young, and then later on we can actually like pick them up, or we haven't done this yet, but we plan to do this. We pick them up, we drive them away from the group 1 kilometer, and we do what we call a homing experiment to see how quickly they find their way back, and to link whether their cognition in their early life, how to navigate, actually reflects how good they become later in life. Okay, so another thing I wanted to show you is how much self-control they have. So this guy had a lot of, sorry, I didn't even get to explain that. So this is a box where there's egg again, and if they have self-control, then they are going to go around, and if they don't have self-control, they're going to go and poke in the glass, and they have to inhibit that in order to get the reward. That's just to show you how the task was. Because I also don't want to take up too much time, but I want to talk a little bit about the monkeys since we are here in Simbithi. And I know that, you know, we walk around your houses, and we really truly appreciate that you guys host us here. So I do feel that I have obligation to give you a little bit back to you guys what we actually find out. And I'm going to do just a brief summary of some of the results that came out from last year's research. So this is again the amazing team working on this. You all know these guys and see them on a daily basis walking around in the blue hats. And so what we want to understand here in the bigger question is like, who adapts to an urban environment and why? And when it comes to the monkeys, you guys are the experts here. So like, you know that they have a lot of threats and a lot of dangers that they need to keep track of. But they also find a lot of good things in this habitat, right? We're all familiar with that. They like the trash bins, they like the bird feeders, and they sometimes like the trampolines, I've heard, which actually is something I'm super excited to chat about if people have that experience. So they need to balance these things. They need to balance this kind of landscape of both joy and fear that they find here in Simbithi, because there's things that evolution has not equipped them with the machinery to understand how a car works, and neither a trampoline, but they're making these experiences, and we're trying to quantify them. So a postdoc that's sitting in Zurich analyzing all the data that the people here in Simbithi is carrying with them, he's been looking at how these urbanization, I call Simbithi an urbanized place because the data that we compare this to comes from 2 field sites that do not have structures like roads and buildings. That is the La Juma field site and the Mawana field site. So we pulled a lot of GPS data together and looked at how these monkeys' behavior change depending on whether or not it is an urbanized environment, just like Simbithi. And what Benjamin found is that, first of all, the monkeys in Simbithi, or in the urbanized environment, have a lot less or reduced home range sizes. And this means that during days, they actually move about a lot less big areas compared to their wild counterparts. We also find that they rely much less on using routes. A route is a way or a road or a path that you use regularly. And these guys don't seem to have to use that a lot. So they travel less, they depend less on these kind of things. And with that, oh, sorry, I want to put in this. Oh, yeah, before I go to the next one. With that, we also found that they have smaller group sizes. I know you guys always feel that you have a lot of monkeys, but the monkey group sizes here at Simbithi are actually smaller in average compared to the ones in the wild. So they might split more, and you might have more groups that are smaller units, and it seems like they also therefore in need of smaller areas where they look for their food. And we also know that the food they look for is actually to above 90% natural food, and mostly eat figs and strelitzia. That's what they eat if they can. And occasionally when we have a window open, they come and get it. It's like myself, like I normally eat salad. I always eat salad if I can. But if somebody puts a chocolate bar on the table, I'm gonna go for that. So. And then we have Paige, who you guys might have met because she was here a while ago, and she did our first little cognition experiment where we wanted to see how good they are at solving problems. We had this little box that first phase was easy. So this is how it went. A monkey had a peanut in this little box. And you all know that this is absolutely nothing for a vervet monkey. Like this is what they do much more complex things in your homes, I know. We tried to make it a little bit more difficult. We put a little lock. I don't know if you can really see it, but there's supposed to be a lock and they have to pull out the drawer instead of. And this monkey chose to do it with his mouth technique. And then we looked at one thing. How flexible are they to switch in between these solutions? So is the same monkey Is one monkey particularly good at switching between two kind of strategies, or do they stick to something when they learn? And then we made it even more difficult. So we put a little lock on both of these to see if they can actually do this technical step of unlocking something with a little thing. And this is how that looked like. So, also very easy, right? So now we know those teeny tiny things does not work. We need more sophisticated locks for monkeys, but who am I to say that to this crowd? I think it would be a really good brainstorming for all of us to know the things that the monkeys can do inside your houses for us to design the appropriate experiments. And then we were interested in these questions. We've followed these guys now for a couple of years, so we start to have a lot of data on who are the monkeys that are going into a house, for example, more, or who are the monkeys that open a bin more. Sorry about that. And so we call that like how the anthropogenic experience, that's what I call it nicely in these questions. And we wanted to see whether those monkeys that do that more frequently are actually doing better on the puzzle box. And that was not the case. So actually we found that performance in how they did in the puzzle box that I showed was mostly explained by a combination of demographic traits, which is sex and age class and rank, and social exposure to having seen somebody else interacting with the box, and not so much their own anthropogenic tendency. But obviously, this is a limited data set, and with more data coming in, we can make much more precise analyses. So what's going on? I for once believe that it is much easier to be a vervet monkey in Simbithi than to be a vervet monkey in the wild, because roaming from one rubbish bin to one rubbish bin is an easy exploitable food source that does not take a lot of new cognition. So in their long evolutionary history, they have been adapted to understand when fruits are ripe and where in their habitat, and when these fruits are not ripe anymore. So they have, evolved a brain that can keep track on when and what happens. They have also evolved a brain that understands that if these fruits are not good, I'm going to switch and I'm going to eat insects and leaves, and I have these different kind of strategies to do extractive foraging. So in reality, all that they were evolved to do, they can do here, but much easier. So they have a brain that is already evolved to do extractive foraging. And when they use that brain in a habitat that require not much more than to just open a lid and you find food, then it doesn't really demand increased cognitive capacities. So we call that our X adaptation hypothesis. And we also found, this was another student who has spent his time here, Adrian McConnell, and he was looking at who are the guys that do come into your houses and do the naughty things that nobody likes, steal the food. And we found that actually these are the rank. This is a rank effect. So the higher rank you are, the more likely you are to do that type of behavior. So maybe higher ranking individuals are more bold, more, self-confident, more willing to take the risks, who knows? We're still trying to figure all of this out. But yeah, that was actually it. And I would love to discuss more, and especially to get the experience of all you guys on what you think could be also interesting things for you to know about the monkeys that live with you. So thank you very much. I'm really happily take questions.
You're studying two groups at the moment, the pink one, and I can't remember, I think it's Acacia one or the other one?
Savannah.
Savannah.
Yeah.
Pink seems to be way bigger than Savannah and travel further. Any particular reasons why?
We don't know yet because pink was relatively new. So we haven't followed them more than a bit of over a year. And so we hope to understand better when we get to analyze that data. But I would gladly say if any of the team who has been following now pink for multiple months have a gut feeling about that question, then you can.
Not so much a reason. Oh. Sorry. One thing that is entirely possible is that pink simply didn't split for a couple of years now. And so right now it is in a state where it has a lot of monkeys, and in the coming years at some point it's going to split, and then it's going to go from 40 down to 20 monkeys again. So there is some natural fluctuation in how big these groups are. It's not necessarily functional that this particular group is bigger. It could change next year already.
It can possibly also change depending how the group's demography changes, so the ratio of females and males to each other and how they manage to be a collaborative group or not. So yeah. If you want to know the reason, like we are following the two groups, we used to follow Acacia. We miss Acacia dearly, but we're hoping to get GPS collars because we had troubles when they were living outside so much, and the poor students were spending so many hours looking for the monkeys that they couldn't collect any data when they were outside. So we said, like, okay, we take more higher quality data of the groups we have, and then hope to get Acacia back on track at some point with collars. But we still keep track on them in sense of their life history. So like how many individuals are born and this kind of data, we still very much hope to maintain. Yeah.
I'd like to just give an experience of what I've had in my home and just find the complexity of how the monkey can differentiate between something that was taken in our kitchen like a banana and not finding something and finding its way to my office and taking those reinforcing rings and opening the box and screw them out and then gone with doing no other damage. So it's quite complex just to see how, and my office is other side of the house. So it's just so interesting to see what they can do and what they find without demolishing everything.
Yes, I would love to be in your offices and get the data what the monkeys are doing in your houses, because that is the interesting part. So we're thinking about, or not only thinking about, I'm very much on the radar to develop a kind of app where people could report these things in a telephone and share these kind of things so that we would really engage a little bit more in citizen science and getting. Yeah, no, I think it's fascinating too. I mean, sometimes I sit in Zurich and I see on the monkey group as well that somebody have this and this happening, and I find it super fascinating, and I'm thankful when people share their experience. Yes, no, we're all very much loving it when you guys share your experiences, because as we say, we cannot get that data inside the houses, and that is where this complex way of thinking comes into account. What do they attend to? What do they ignore? And I mean, we all believe that they keep track on where you are in your house, right? And then when you turn your back, they know that. So, I mean, already these things would be nice. We had idea about doing a project on how they read body language. So it's, yeah, we're going to need more time and more questions to be answered. Yes, please.
With the monkeys in the estates around here, we come from Brettonwood, but there's always millions of babies. Every monkey has a baby, yet the numbers don't seem to increase. Was there any comments on that?
Yes. So out of the babies, they really are not many that survive the whole first year. And as far as I know from our few years here, we have a lot of mortality from cars. So they get hit by cars, especially the young ones, because what happens is that the mothers might run over the street and the mom might look out for a car, but not all of them, very few actually, but the babies definitely do not look out for the car. So they just follow their mom and they are hit. So if it seems scary, like it's a growing population because there's many babies, that is not the case. They do get more, there's a high mortality rate, and to be said as well, like there's also many babies in a natural environment of vervet monkeys, so and they die because they get hunted on by predators. So yeah.
I wanted to ask, if you did a survey in the Bushveld, how many monkeys would there be per, say, 10 hectares compared to our garden environments?
That's an interesting question that I do not have an answer for. I would, with the bush belt, you mean? Oh, yeah. I mean, they have a lot more space available, that is for sure. But there's also overlap a lot between those groups in the wild. So we would need to do a proper calculation on that, actually. It would be feasible for us to draw upon that. Yeah.
What I was wondering was, in the bush, in the open environment, do they use the eggs of birds as part of their diet more or less than they do in an urban environment where they possibly haven't got such a selection of fruits to rely on?
Yeah. So it's very, we don't have exact data on how often the monkeys eat bird eggs, neither from the wild or from the bush environment, neither from here. I mean, we all know they do eat bird eggs in all environments, and they love it. I do not know if it might be easier for them to get to the bird's nests that are, for example, at human structures. And because if they know and memorize the locations very well here, and if you have a smaller home range in the urban environment, there is less locations to keep track of. So like in one way, if your area that you need to memorize characteristics of is smaller, then that could play a role. But then obviously it depends on the density of birds, because if you have a lot of birds, you have a lot of birds' nests, you have a lot of eggs. So you would need a census of both parts of the coin.
A friend of mine, Hugh Chittenden, who is an ornithologist, did a survey in an urban area and found that 80% of the nests of the birds had been destroyed by monkeys. And we used to have on our estate, which is Dunkirk, the next door estate, guinea fowl. We no longer have any. We used to have buff spotted flufftails. We no longer have any. We've lost our spotted ground thrush completely, and we're blaming it all on the monkeys, and possibly there must be some way of controlling their numbers.
So but do you have cats at that estate?
We do have cats on our estate.
Obviously, cats love to go for the bird nests too. So like, I wouldn't just blame the monkeys, but monkeys they are opportunistic feeders. They're gonna eat on the good stuff they find. But one interesting thing I would urge people to use, I mean, these equipments are not expensive these days, to put up camera traps, and then you'll have an answer to your question. You'll see who is coming and taking those. If you know about the location of a bird's nest, if you have a bird feeder, then you're not supposed to. If you feed the birds, you're feeding all wildlife, because there's no sign on a bird feeder that say like monkeys are not welcome, and even if that sign would be there, there's no monkey who is reading that sign. So like, I think it would be interesting little mini project to keep a camera trap, and you would get a lot of fascinating actually animals to see who is there and doing what, if you have a location that that they are visiting for the bird purpose.
Okay, that's worth trying.
Yeah, it could
Thanks
be really,
very much.
I think it could be actually quite interesting for yourself as well, because you might be surprised or what shows up.
Thank you to Dr. Sofia for the talk, and thank you everyone for coming, and happy Environmental Day.
Yes, and I just also wanted to say that we decided to donate the money for the entrance to situations where we have injured monkeys, so that the team that is taking care of that situation have a little bit of aid. So that's just all thanks to you guys. And if you have other issues, like things on your heart you want to talk about when it comes to the monkeys and all of that, my team is always available, especially you all know Stephanie and her passion for all of this. So just contact us. We're more than happy to have the conversation with every one of you. Thank you for coming.